No, other than those couple of books I nicked from Smith's, I've avoided crime completely. It's weird because for the first couple of books, you're on a bit of a wing and a prayer when it comes to doing your research. I would ring up the Metropolitan Police press office and pester them. And it wasn't until I was able to go to them with a book or two and go, look, I'm not a nutter, you know, I do this. That's when they assigned me a detective inspector, who is now a detective chief superintendent, has become a good friend over kind of a dozen years. And he's hooked me up with whoever I need hooking up with. If I need to talk to somebody from the kidnap squad, he'll put me in touch. If I need to talk to somebody in forensics, whatever. Talk to people. They want to talk to you. You know, I had all the medical advice I needed for this book from the guy I mentioned, Phil Coburn. You know, if there's always something you need to find out about with each book. I wrote a book about the homeless community in central London, and so I went to an organisation called The Connection at St Martin's and hooked up with them, and they, you know, were very helpful. So people want to tell you stuff. They really do. They're really helpful. I needed to know some stuff about brain tumours, and I just wrote to about 3 or 4, you know, sort of brain surgeons. They all got back saying, "Yeah, come in and have a chat." It's 4 out of 4, and you go in and you end up with stuff that you'd never have. You know, it's the banter. It's the sort of. It's the same as when I hang out with cops. Once every 6 months, I'll go out on a kind of ride along with uniformed officers, normally in Croydon, oddly, which is always interesting. The last one I did was on a bank holiday Friday in Croydon, and I'm driving along with the two hardest women you've ever. I mean, these two PCs who are just incredible. And the shift started with a body, it ended with a body. I mean, it was non-stop. But you get stuff out of it which you couldn't make up. We were driving along. These two hairy-arsed women, I mean, that's so tough. You know, they will just steam into a gang of 10 lads who are beating 7 bells out of each other. They will just steam in and break it up, and they don't take any nonsense. But we were driving along, and a bird flew into the windscreen. And they went, "Oh, a bird, deal with it!" So I picked this bird up and, you know, put it into the hedge or whatever. And then we went back to the station, and so they're winding up their inspector going, "We've had a body, so Gov, you know, blah blah blah." And so this inspector told me this story, and he said, "Oh, that reminds me about when I was on patrol once with this guy, and we ran a cat over." And they ran this cat over, and they went, "Oh God, what are we going to do? We better turn around and see." So they turned the car around. They went back to try and find this cat, and there's this cat lying there on the pavement. So the copper looks around, and, you know, as an act of mercy, finishes this cat off with his truncheon. Unfortunately, the cat they'd run over was about 30 feet the other direction, and this was a completely innocent cat sunning itself on the pavement. And I'm going, "That's too good. I've got it." So that's in the book I've just finished writing, a character called Two Cats, because they all have nicknames, every single copy. And it's that kind of banter which you just get, the way they talk to each other, the way that, because it's a whole self-contained little world. Sorry to cat lovers. That's the other thing about crime fiction. You can do anything you like to people. You can brutalise them and murder them in any way imaginable. People don't complain. You even threaten a furry animal. Just go anywhere near a cat or a dog, and you will get a sackload of hate mail. So there we are. That was a very long. My answer should be 140 characters long. If you're dealing with a heightened reality, which readers of crime fiction buy into, or choose not to buy into. I mean, clearly, if the books we wrote accurately reflected the day-to-day machinations of a murder investigation, they would be 1,500 pages long. They would be as dull as ditch water. You would not be satisfied with the ending. It's a kind of heightened reality that actually hasn't changed since Sherlock Holmes. You know, if I was to describe to you a protagonist, a detective of a crime novel, who was socially dysfunctional, who couldn't have relationships, who liked music, who had problems with addiction, I could be talking about Ian Rankin's detective or my detective, but actually I'm talking about Sherlock Holmes. You know, the actual archetype of the detective hasn't changed an awful lot, and in terms of what crime readers want, you know, they can read true crime if they want. Also, the actual business of crime solving is not necessarily what I and an awful lot of other crime writers are interested in. Crimes may be solved, but actually the act of violence at the heart of it never goes away. I'm interested in how that act of violence reverberates through families, down generations, through communities. You know, a murder might be solved, but I'm more interested in what that murder does to people than the actual bureaucracy you're talking about. No, I don't think it is. I mean, the thing with genre writing, with crime writing, especially crime writing in a series, is that what readers of that series want with the next book is a book that's different but not too different. You have to tick certain genre boxes. You have to fulfill certain expectations. If you don't want to, go write something else. Nobody has a gun to anybody's head. I'm a huge fan of crime fiction. Other genres leave me cold. I'm no fan of fantasy fiction or romance or, you know, historical fiction necessarily. Crime fiction, I was just bitten by a bug at an early age. I love to read it and I love to write it. And it's a nice gang to be part of. Crime writers are a very collegiate bunch. We all tend to get on with one another. It's a very welcoming... You know, I'd come from comedy, where the bitching and the backbiting, you wouldn't believe. It's a horrible, brutal industry. Crime writers, maybe it's because we get all our nastiness out on the page. But generally, a group of crime writers is a very welcoming bunch. Yes, I have done. Although finding them is a little trickier. Yes, I mean I've done plenty of stuff in prisons, and yeah, no, I'm just as interested in that. I mean, I don't deal in, and crime isn't about things being black and white, you know, and that's where crime fiction I think has moved on incredibly, even in the last 50 years. Never mind since the golden age of crime fiction, where, you know, the days of Agatha Christie and Marjorie Allingham and Dorothy L. Sayers, where everything had to be tied up in a nice neat bow, and the villain was usually working class or foreign, often both. Now it's not like that. It's about shades of grey. I'm not necessarily interested in a cop that's wholly good and a villain that's wholly bad. Often the other way around. Quite often I've tried to write books where the reader is rooting for the killer from page one. I want them to sympathise with the killer, or at least empathise with the killer. So yeah, no, I'm equally interested in that. This goes right to the heart of why I'm ambivalent about this book, because it's a book I'm inordinately fond of, but it's a book that I would write so differently if I was writing it now. The problem is, well, not the problem, it's a reality. You make your mistakes in the early books, and I made plenty of mistakes in Sleepyhead. The first one being the musical taste that you allude to. I decided that there was no way he could have the same musical taste as me, because that would just be lazy. So I gave him this ludicrous penchant for kind of trip-hop and garage music, and because I thought, oh, there'll be some fun scenes, and there's one kind of vaguely humorous scene where he goes into what was Tower Records in Piccadilly Circus, and the guy's taking the mickey out of him because it's music that he's way too old for. But I hate that stuff. And it was just too much like hard work. I was having to do as much research into that as I was into forensics or anything else. So I just dropped it. I just quietly dropped it from the end of book one. And from book two onwards, he's had exactly the same taste as me, which is for country music. He likes Johnny Cash and Hank Williams, and I just pretended that had never happened. Similarly with the football, you know, again, if I was going to write it again today, he wouldn't be a Spurs fan. He'd probably be a QPR fan or a Mill, because at the time, I'm a Wolves fan, and I wanted Thorne to support a team that were like mine, that were ailing, that were sleeping giants, that had a fantastic history but now were rubbish. Unfortunately, Spurs have been doing far too well in recent years. So I would rewrite that, but I would also... You like to think you get better. You're trying to write a better book every time. You won't always write a better book every time. But, you know, it's like Usain Bolt. There's a point when he goes, do you know what? That's as fast as I can bloody well run. I can't go any faster. That's my personal best. And that may be book 4 or book 1 or book whatever. It's rarely book 13. But you try. So looking back on early books is in a way quite embarrassing. Because it feels like scribblings. It feels like, you know, I got lucky. I wasn't one of those writers that writes 28 unpublished novels. I wrote 30,000 words and got published. And I was like, oh my God, so I was kind of learning on the job. I was learning as I did it. So there's an awful lot of things I'd change about Sleepyhead, which is why I'm ambivalent about it. But I'm also inordinately fond of it. And the odd thing is, whenever readers vote as to which their favourite book is, it's usually that one. Which may just be because it's the first one they read, because it's the first one in the series, in the same way that my favourite books of other authors are often their first books. But yeah, there's a lot I would change. But you can't. But I did get the chance to change some stuff when it was televised. I was able to knock certain rough edges off when they did that. Also, there's a character in it who's called, what's he called? Frank Keeble, who is Thorne's boss in this book. And again, he vanished without trace after the first book, because I just couldn't get a handle on the character at all. And he was replaced by a character called Russell Brigstock, who's now been in all the books. So yeah, full of cock-ups. All you hope for when your book has been optioned for TV is that you get a good actor. That's all you want. You live in fear of the good news, bad news phone call. Your book's been optioned and you live in fear of the phone call, you know, the producer ringing you up and says, great news, it's been greenlit. Bad news, it's Ross Kemp. You live in fear of that phone call. Apologies if he's here. All you want is a good actor, and that actor will then make the part his own. That actor will never be the person readers see in their head. Never, because that's the beauty of reading. You immediately see, you know, you start to paint your own pictures. I remember we showed a little preview of it, a little 5-minute preview of it at the Edinburgh Book Festival about 6 months before it was televised. And the light, you know, we showed this preview and it was great, and then the lights went up, and so I said, so what do you think? And a woman in the front row went, he's too tall.